Take the next two questions. Deputy Tommy Broughan.
Well, Minister, you might remember I raised concerns about the refinancing of some of our benchmark bonds in 2018-2019 with yourself, I think, and the Taoiseach and the previous Taoiseach. And obviously our national debt, our interest payments since, I think, 2008 is roughly the size of the budget that you launched a couple of weeks ago, and the actual overall size of national debt, of course, still projected to be over 100% of GNI. So I just wondered what your projections for the next 4 or 5 years, particularly in relation to refinancing. Thanks, Can.
The recently published annual report on public debt in Ireland outlines that the interest burden of public debt is perhaps best assessed by examining the interest ratio revenue, which demonstrates the percentage of total government revenue dedicated to interest expenditure. The ratio has been on a downward trend since 2013, but remains high by EU standards. As of 2017, debt interest payments amount to almost 8% of general government revenue, compared to 3% prior to the financial crisis. As the Deputy may be aware, projections of interest expenditure for the next 5 years can be found in the Economic and Fiscal Outlook published in Budget 2019. As a percentage of total general government revenue, interest expenditure is projected to amount to 5.8% in 2019, 5.3% in 20, 4.9% in 21, 5% in 2022 and 5.1% in 23, displaying a broadly downward trajectory. At just under €5.3 billion, general government interest expenditure this year is expected to be close to 9% lower than in 2017 and over 30% below its 2013 peak. It has been in a downward trend since then. There are a number of reasons behind this. The early repayment of the €22.5 billion IMF loan facility and bilateral bond switching, where we redeemed shorter-term debt in return for longer-term debt. This year alone, €1.4 billion of 1990 to 20 maturities have been switched into longer-dated bonds. The ECB's quantitative easing programme has clearly been a big factor, and the NTMA has taken advantage of these favourable bond market conditions to issue a very large volume of long-term debt at low rates. With funding concluded for this year, the NTMA has now issued €17 billion in general government bonds. They are at a weighted yield of 1.1% and an average maturity of 12 years.
So, Minister, when I look at NTMA's figures then, and I notice that the bond component is steadily growing, does that therefore include the bonds you're referring to, that aspect of the national debt is increasing but is safer? Because I think the concern that was raised by a number of academics and others in the years up to this year was that the concern was that interest rates generally would change and that we could be left in a very difficult situation. But I mean, you'll agree that it's still a dire enough burden for our country. That 42,000, I think, per man, woman, and child that you quoted in the budget. It's still a very significant burden. And can I just ask you, the rainy day fund? How will the rainy day fund operate in relation to the gross and the net debt? Is that something that we therefore will deduct and take into account in relation to net, or does it stand alone? Thanks, Can.
To answer your last question first, it will have an effect on our net debt because it's an asset that we have. It's funding that's been held by the state, and particularly for financial markets when they're looking at the solvency of the state, that will reduce our net indebtedness position. In relation to the first half of your question, yes, our national debt will be more and more bond financed, and at a point in time will be exclusively bond financed. And in fact, one thing I will check for you is, given where we are now with the early repayment of the IMF programme in particular, I imagine maybe even by this point it's already nearly exclusively bond financed, and the progress that has been made now, which will insulate us to a degree from changes that will happen in the future, is the success of the NTMA in issuing longer-term debt. That's a key thing for us to have done. But your earlier introduction is correct. To have a national debt of €202 billion is a massive constraint for the country, and over time, by running surpluses, by being careful about one-off gains, we have to get that figure down.